When I wanted to start making animation memes on YouTube, the very first issue I ran into was how the hell do I even make these? Why are all the programs subscription-based and incredibly expensive? So today I'm going to be solving both of these issues for you. You're welcome. I know this is a very long video, but I promise you after this video you will be able to make animation memes for free from scratch. This is a start to finish tutorial, super beginner friendly, you don't need to have any editing knowledge. I will explain everything to you. However, I won't go into detail on frame-by-frame animation or drawing. If you already have a bit of knowledge, there's also timestamps in case you want to skip specific parts of the video to get to the ones that really interest you. My name is Will, I'm an artist and animator, and I will be showing you how to make animation memes in DaVinci Resolve. I've used this program for all of the animatics that I've made, and it's worked perfectly for me. It's also just a really good program to work with for videos in general, so I can highly recommend it. Disclaimer, while you will not need to spend any money on the program itself, you will need a PC or laptop of some sort, as well as a way to draw your characters. You don't even need a super great PC or laptop. Until very recently, I still used my 7-year-old PC and that worked for me, so you should be fine unless you're trying to do this on a literal toaster. Okay, so first of all, where do you download the program? You can get DaVinci Resolve 18 on the Blackmagic website, I will link it below. And once you're on the website, you literally just click on free download now. And it will ask you if you want the free version or the studio version, which is the paid version. Obviously, we're going for the free version. You pick your platform, and then it gives you a little pop-up. You fill out all of the details, and then you will get the free download. You don't have to pay anything for it, don't worry. You click register and download, and then you should be fine. Then you just install the program and open the exe file. If you don't get a little icon on your desktop, what you can do is go into your search bar and type in Resolve, and it should show up right here. If you can't find the program in the search bar, go onto the drive where you install the program. Usually there will be a folder called Blackmagic Design, but for me, since I did it a bit differently, it's just DaVinci Resolve, and then you can scroll down until you find the Resolve application file. This is how the path looked for a friend of mine, and this is how my path looked. Just for reference, I'm sure you'll be able to find it. Then you just launch the program, and it will give you a little loading screen. For the free version, the screen will be up a little bit longer, and then it opens your project manager. This is where you can essentially find all of your projects. For you, it will be pretty much empty. For me, obviously, I have a couple things in here. You can make folders and stuff. To make a new project, you can either click on the untitled project or click the new project button down here. Then you can give it a name. We're just gonna call it tutorial project. And then you hit enter or click create. And then it should take you into the actual project. Now, this is gonna be a bit much at first, but don't worry, it's not that complicated to get used to all of this. First of all, down here, you see the different tabs that we have, which is the media tab, where you're gonna have all of your files that you drag in, the cut tab, which I honestly never use, the edit tab, which is where I do most of the editing, the Fusion tab, which is where you do more detailed animations that need a bit more precision. Color, which we're not going to touch, but it can definitely be very useful. It's mainly for color grading. Fairlight, which is the sound studio, which we will also not be touching today. And Deliver, which is where you essentially render your project. Now let's start in the edit page, as that is where most of the magic happens. First of all, when you open the program, it should look something like this. There's a couple of important things that are not showing right now that you will definitely need later. So you go up to the top right and click on the inspector. You will see why this is important in a bit. Down here you can always access the project manager by clicking on the home icon. And you can also access the project settings on the cogwheel. Before you start the project, you should think about what resolution you want to work in. Do you want to work horizontally or vertically for a reel, for example, or a TikTok? If you do want to make a reel, literally just switch these two numbers around and you will be fine. Another thing that's important is the frame rate. We're going to work with 30 FPS, but overall the main two frame rates you probably want to work with is 30 FPS or 60 FPS. Then we click on save and you're good to go. To manually save your project, you can go up to File and click Save Project or Save Project As, and this is also where you can export your project if you, for example, want to work on it with another person. Another really important feature of DaVinci Resolve is autosave. To enable autosave, you go up to the top left, go to Preferences, go to User, go to Project Save and Load, and here you will find the autosave settings. You can mess around with these depending on what you think is good, but generally with these settings, I don't remember having ever seriously lost any progress in this program at all. Click on Save and we can move on. Now this should be the way the edit page looks for you once you open it. There's a couple things missing that you will need, so go up to the top right and open the inspector. That should open a little side panel and we're going to need that later. Obviously we can't really do any editing without any footage, so we're going to drag in some footage. This is the footage of an animatic I did. So when you drag in footage that has a different frame rate than your project, it will ask you to change the project frame rate to the frame rate that the footage has. And depending on what you're doing, you might want to reject that or accept that. It just depends on your preference. Okay, so let's get to the basics. First of all, you have your video here and then the audio below it. There's different video tracks that you can stack on top of each other, and the same goes for audio. Your playhead is this little red thing right here, and you can already notice once I scrub over the footage it will play and it will also make some noise. I'm gonna lower the volume a little bit over here. This is the general volume slider. If you lower this, the actual footage won't be affected. It will just be what you hear in your headphones. Now let's do some basic stuff. Over here, you can zoom in and zoom out into your timeline to be able to do more detailed editing. You can cut a clip by clicking on the edges and dragging them. That works in both directions. Or by clicking on the blade tool up here and clicking onto your clip. Now, as you can see, if I use this on the video, it also cuts the audio. This is because we have linked selection turned on and both of the clips are linked, as you can tell by the little link icon on both of them. If you select both, which in this case, since they're linked, should work by just clicking on one of them, you do a right click and you select link clips, it will unlink the clips since they were already linked. Now, even if linked selection is turned on, you can edit the audio and the video separately from each other. Undo and redo work like they do in any other program. Say you put a cut somewhere you don't want it, you press Ctrl Z, and if you actually did want that cut and you undid it, you can press Ctrl Shift Z, and then it will come back. It's pretty much the same with copy and paste, works like in any other program. You click on this, Ctrl C, and then go somewhere else, Ctrl V, and you copy paste to that clip somewhere else. A pretty cool function this program has is the ripple delete option. So we're gonna just put some random cuts. If I normally delete this by going to delete selected, it will leave an empty space here. But if we don't want that empty space, what we can do is, instead of clicking delete selected, is ripple delete. And it will automatically move the video footage behind it to fill the gap. Another important thing is snapping. If snapping is turned on and you make a cut near your playhead, it will always land at the exact position of the playhead. If you turn this off, you can see you can go very close to the playhead and make a cut there without it being directly at the playhead. This also works if your playhead is somewhere else, but let's say you want to cut the audio and the video is cut at a moment nearby, then it will also snap to that exact position. This is also true if you have separated video footage and you want them to snap together. They will perfectly meet at the edge. Now let's say we want to change the position of this character in the frame, but don't want to change the general position of the entire video. First of all, we zoom in a little bit. Each of these markers symbolizes a frame. We skip to a position that's before this character comes on screen. And then, using your arrow keys, you can skip through each individual frame until you land on the frame of the character you want to move. Now you want to make sure it is this frame and not the one where the other character is still on screen. Because if you cut here, you will have one single frame of this character before we actually get to the character we want to edit. So you make a cut right here, and then we do the exact same thing on the other end, where we want to make sure we cut on the new character to make sure that both of the beginning and the end frame are the character that we want to see and not anyone else. Now, if we want to move this character, we need to select the video clip. And then up here, we have some very convenient settings. Now, let's say we think he's a little bit too far out and we want to bring him closer in. You can click on the zoom option, either on the X or the Y, and drag. You could also technically click the link icon and then only drag into one direction and like stretch him, but we don't want to do that, so let's link it back. Now it's looking a little bit odd because there's a lot of space up here, so we want to bring him down a bit. You can go to the Y section and drag it into the direction you want it to go in. And let's say we wanted to change position X as well, so sideways, we could do that too. There's also an option for rotating your character, as well as just generally flipping the image. Now if you play this back, you will see that only the section with our character is zoomed in and the rest is still normal. Let's talk about video tracks. If you want to add another video or an image above this one, you can either just drag it in and it will automatically make another video track, and the same goes for audio. Or you can also right-click and add track. This will just add a new track above your last video track. If you want to add a video track at a specific position, you can go to add tracks ... and then pick how many tracks you want to add and where you want to add them. In this case, we're adding it above video 1 and below video 2. Down here, you can do the exact same thing for audio, but we don't need a second audio track in this video, so we're going to reduce it to 0. And now we have an empty track in between these two files. Now, if you have a bunch of tracks, which I often end up having, and you are not sure if some of them are empty, you can literally just click delete empty tracks, and it will delete all of the tracks that aren't being used. Another thing that is important is you can change the height of these tracks, which is especially important for audio, so you can better see what's going on. You can also make the audio smaller if you don't need it that much and move it down. And of course, you can make the video smaller or larger, depending on what it is. For example, if I have many layers and I have a background video track, for example, I usually end up minimizing it so that I don't have to look at it, since it's not being actively messed with. There's also some more options with tracks. For example, you can make a video invisible by clicking Disable Video Track. And now it will not show us the video anymore, but still play the audio. And you can essentially do the same thing for audio by muting the audio. And now if we play it, the sound is completely gone. Another option is locking a track if you don't accidentally want to make any edits to it. And you can do the same thing for audio tracks. Now, another cool thing that you can do is add text. First of all, we need another little sidebar that is likely not already open for you. For that, you go up to the top left and click on Effects. This should open this little menu, and then we can go to Titles and pick any title you like. Usually the text one is sufficient. It doesn't move, but you can animate it, and it doesn't have too big of a toll on your PC either. Drag the text where you want to have it in your timeline. And then we can write in some text. We're just going to put in tutorial. And then you can change the font, which will conveniently already show you what it looks like in the preview. We're going to go with this font, make it a little bit bigger. We can change the color. We're going to keep it white. And there's a bunch of other options here that you can mess with and find out on your own what they do. It's not that complicated. Now, there is a second option for adding text that is a lot better if you want to have subtitles on your video. So we're clicking somewhere else. We're going to go here. And then in the titles menu, we scroll to the very bottom where it says subtitle. Now, the subtitle will open a completely new track that is not a video track like the text option, but it's a subtitle track. Now this track works a bit differently to the text track. You can have different subtitles all over the place that say different things, and they will all use the same style as each other, which you can edit over here. We're not going to go too much into detail with this, but the things you should know is if you want to have actual subtitles in the final version of your video, you can make them in DaVinci and you can either have them be part of the actual video, or you can export them as a file to import into YouTube, and then YouTube can use it as normal subtitles that you can find on all kinds of videos. We don't really need subtitles, so we're going to get rid of them again. So now that you know the basics of editing videos in this program, I will show you how you can actually make proper animatics. I already prepared a file for this. Now, what we want to do is essentially have this character move through the screen to the beat of the music. He will be nodding his head and moving his arms a little, and his cape will be moving as well. Now to do that, obviously you can't just plop in a flat image. You have to separate your layers. Okay, to show you what I mean, I'm going to select his head and click on the icon over here, which will allow us to essentially move the item that we selected, like so. Now you can see that the head is separate from the body and is separate from the hair layer. And I also have an arm, the cape, the upper arm, this little jewelry, the lower arm, and sometimes it starts glitching around, but don't worry, it's usually nothing fatal. It will go away again. And the hand. Now, how many of these layers you need and how you have to separate them depends entirely on what movements you want the character to do. Just think about if you want to nod the head, for example, you need to make sure that his throat continues underneath his head, so that when you move the head upwards, it won't look cut off. And the same goes for everything else. You just want to make sure that everything is one solid piece, and there's no weird parts missing where they overlap with other objects that will be moving. Now, if you drag all of your images into the program, you want to make sure that the things that are supposed to be in front of everything else need to be at the very top of the video tracks. And the things that are supposed to be behind everything else, like the background, need to be on the lowest layer. Now, I already showed you the basics of how to transform things, aka move things around. And now I will show you how to actually animate them. So the first thing we're going to do is move this arm back here. And in order to do that, we want to rotate it, since the arm sits in his shoulder socket and is not just going to move side to side, and instead is going to rotate around. The issue here is that the anchor point, aka the point it rotates around, is not properly set. We need the anchor point to be where the actual shoulder joint would, so that the arm can move accordingly. To edit the joint, you just grab the dot right in the middle and move it where you think the shoulder joint should be. And now if we rotate it, we can see that it moves like a proper joint. So how can we animate this? Obviously, if we hit play right now, I'm going to hit this loop button right here so it keeps looping. It doesn't move. So how do we make it move? We need to animated using keyframes. It's not very complicated, I promise. Make sure you're at the beginning of your clip and hit this little button next to the rotation angle. What this will do is it will create a keyframe. The way you can see this is if you click onto your video, onto this little diamond, and then you will see a little dot right here. That's your keyframe. Now if you play this, still nothing happens, right? So what if we put a keyframe at the end? Usually when I work, if there is something else behind your clip, you want to make sure that you're one frame within your clip, because otherwise it will already show you the next clip and you won't see what you're doing. So we're putting a keyframe at the end of the clip. Still nothing happening, because obviously we didn't move anything. But now, if we move back to the beginning, to our first keyframe, and we just rotate the arm, and now we hit play, the arm moves. Because essentially it remembers the rotation for the beginning keyframe is 24, and for the last keyframe it's 0. And so between that it just linearly moves the arm. I'm gonna make the movement a little bit more extreme in this case. Now if we play it, it looks like this. Now obviously that's a very simple movement and it looks quite boring, but we will get to that later. You can also move the keyframes down here if you, for example, realize that you don't want the animation to end on this frame, but instead you want it to end somewhere in the middle so the movement happens a bit faster. Then you can just drag the keyframe around to wherever you want it to be, and then it will look like this. And another thing you can do to make your animation look a bit more bouncy is after your maximum rotation, which is -20 in this case, at the end of the clip, you can add a rotation that is slightly higher, so -20 to, let's say, -16, and then it won't just stop moving, it will actually move back a little bit, and it will look a little bit more dynamic. Now this is still pretty stiff, but we will get to how to fix that later. I'm also going to really quickly make his head nod, and in this case, right now we don't really want to move the hair, so I'm going to select the image for the hair as well as the image for the head. Select both of them, right click, and add a new compound clip. We're going to call this head. What that essentially does, it puts both images or any clips that you combine into one, so you can move them around together. This will make it a lot easier to move the head without having to adjust the hair to fit the head movement all of the time. So first of all, we're going to adjust our anchor point to the neck around here. And then we're going to keyframe both the position and the rotation. And then we're going to do the same thing for here, where the maximum keyframe of the other part is. Gonna show you the keyframes really quick. Gonna do 2 keyframes, and then we're going to go to the end and add 2 keyframes. Also, just a side note, if you go anywhere between this, if you have set a single keyframe and you move one of these objects, it is going to automatically add a new keyframe where you adjusted the movement. So just be careful when you do that, because sometimes you will do it on accident. And just be mindful about it. You can always just click and hit delete to delete a keyframe. Okay, now at the beginning we want the head to look a little bit up and also be higher on his neck. And then at the maximum point we want it to look down and be a little bit lower on his neck. And at the last point we want it to be somewhere in the middle. I'm actually going to delete both of these keyframes, so it will set me to the position of this keyframe, because what I can do now is I can slightly adjust this position, and now if we play, it looks like this. Okay, so now this still looks pretty damn stiff, I won't lie. So let me show you how to make it a lot less stiff. Because right now what the program is doing is it's taking point A, point B, and point C and projecting linear movements based on these keyframes. Now this is going to look very unnatural. So what we do is, again, on the clip, we can close the keyframes for now. We click on this little curve symbol and it will open up the curve editor. Now the curve editor is pretty easy to understand. You have your keyframes right here. You can set a new keyframe right here. And also if you click on the arrows, it will take you to the next keyframe in that direction. And you can select the keyframes you want to edit right here. So right now we're on the keyframe for position Y. I think we're going to edit the rotation angle first. Now this window is not very ideal because you can barely tell the differences between the heights here. So it's a little bit finicky to work with, and I will have a better solution for you later. But this is the option that, at least for me, is easier on my PC. So if you don't have a great PC, this might be the better option for you. So what we will do is we will go onto the first keyframe. We'll select the first keyframe. And essentially here you can see that there's straight lines between all of these keyframes. Now there's some options up here. If you click this option, you see there's a change in the movement and the little handle right here. This option essentially will make this handle face towards the right side. If you click this option, it will give you handles on both sides. And if you click this option, it will give you a handle towards the left side. So for the first frame, we want one towards the right side. If we pull this up, for example, it will affect the movement. And it will do a very weird movement because we changed it towards the wrong direction, obviously. We can also make it go downwards, which is where we want it to go. And now suddenly the movement looks a lot smoother, doesn't it? So what this essentially does is, in place of the straight line that was there before, it now adjusts the movement according to a curve, which means in the beginning it will go faster into the movement until it hits this keyframe right here. You kind of have to mess around a little bit with this to find what looks good for you, but it definitely makes things look a lot smoother. Now I'm also going to adjust the X and Y position the same way I adjusted the rotation. Just gonna smooth out things a little bit. Now I'm gonna do the same thing for the arm. Click onto the clip, go into the curve, and then we add this little handy tool. And then it should look better. Oh, that's a bit... Okay, so if you go too far down with this, it will do a weird, like, jitter in between. Let's not make it this extreme so you can see it better. There's like a weird jitter in between. So you want to make sure that, unless that's what you want, that you don't make this curve go lower than the next keyframe. Or in some cases higher, it depends. Yeah, that looks nice. And now if you want to move this entire character as one, so say he's sliding in from the right side, for example, then you just go ahead and select all of the parts of the character. Make sure not to select the background. Make a new compound clip, call it whatever you like. And then it might glitch around, but usually it's fine. Yeah, it's glitching around in the preview here, but it's fine when we actually play it back. Sometimes this happens, I don't really know why, but usually there's a way to work around it. So we're just gonna ignore the fact that half of him is gone right now and add a little transformation. So first of all, we want a keyframe at the beginning, a keyframe at the end, and a keyframe somewhere around here. Now in the beginning, he's supposed to be coming from the right side. Oh yeah, it's definitely glitching around a little bit, but that's fine. And then he's going to go a little bit more to the right side, and then he's going to snap a little bit back. Okay, let's play that. That's a little bit too harsh of a movement. Let's make it like this. Yeah, that's better. And then we adjust it. Now that's definitely not perfect, but it does the job. And if you work on it long enough, you will get to something that looks more like this. Okay, but there's another thing I want to show you. So I'm going to copy and paste my compound clip. Because in order to edit it again, essentially you need to open it, but that will delete the animation that's currently on the character. The right to left movement will be gone once you do this. So I copy and paste it for later, and I'm going to show you how you can get that movement back. Let's use decompose in place using clips only, and then you will have everything back the way it was. So if we play this, no right to left movement, but the nodding is still there. And now let's say we want to make his cloak move, but not in a way where it just rotates, but it actually moves around flowy like a cloak. To do that, you will have to head over to your toolbox, go to OpenFX, scroll to the very bottom, and drag the warper tool onto the file you want to edit. Now what that does is, up here it gives you a little menu where you can start warping things. I can click on the screen, I can move it, but nothing's really happening. I can change stuff here, move stuff around, but it's not gonna do anything. And in order to use this, you need to turn on OpenFX overlay. Again, you don't see anything, but don't panic, because when you click on screen now, you will make little dots. And now what these dots do is once you click somewhere, it will stay there, but when you click on it again and you drag it around, it will move the object. This tool is a little bit tricky to use because you can't properly undo, and if you accidentally set a new point, it will look a bit wonky. So you kind of have to be very careful with this tool. But essentially, I'm just going to set up points around the edges of the cloak, and then once I did that, I'm going to hit the manual keyframing button at the beginning, somewhere in the middle maybe, and at the end, and then we can animate the cloak in a more natural way. And now if you click on the little keyframe thing here, it won't actually show you anything. So but to hop between keyframes, you have to click on the arrows at the side here. And I want to make it go down here. Now if you want to do this properly, you should make sure that your cape in this case goes beyond the canvas, because right here you can see it cut off at the edge. So you just have to be mindful of that when you make your actual images. So now if we play that back, the cloak is animated. Not very well animated, but it's a tutorial, and I think it does what it's supposed to do. Also, another neat trick is if you mess up, for example, you move something here and you can't undo it, what you can do is either remove the single keyframe, or you can remove all of the keyframes with this little refresh icon right here, and that will reset everything back to where it was. So now let's assume we've done some important edits to this, and we want to give it the movement that it had before when it was still going side to side, which it now isn't. What we do for that is, again, we select everything, put it in a compound clip, we can call it whatever, and now it still won't move side to side. The second clip is what's still moving side to side. Right, this is the first clip and second clip. First clip, second clip. So we want to transfer the movement that we have here to this clip. So what we do is we click onto this clip, click copy, then you click onto the first clip, and then you click paste attributes. It will open this little window where it essentially asks you, hey, which attributes do you want us to copy onto this clip? In this case, since we only animated the position, we're just going to select the position. If we animate anything else, like the rotation angle, we could do that as well, or the anchor point, and it will copy all of that over to our new clip. Now if we hit apply, we can delete this one, and now we have our side-to-side movement again. Another thing that we can do if these rendering issues are bothering us is we can click on the clip, click render in place. What this will do is essentially it will render all of the frames of the clip, put them somewhere else on your PC, and then just play them whenever you play over the clip. You have to be careful with this because once you do this, your clip won't be editable anymore. So if you still want it to be editable, make sure to make a copy first. We're going to select QuickTime and uncompressed because that essentially means that it will give us PNG images of what we animated. Since the background is still separate, that means we need a transparent background behind the character. If you don't do this, then it will essentially render everything that isn't the character as pure black and you won't be able to have a background behind it anymore. So we hit render and we select where we want it to render. I'm just going to select this folder. It renders and then the clip plays normally. So if you're happy with your clip, you don't really have to render it into place, but that's just a way to make it run more smoothly, especially for lower end PCs. So let's say you're happy with what you made and you want to do some post-processing or add whatever effects that you feel like. You are going to need an adjustment clip. Now I have them in my favorites right here, but to find them you can also just click on the toolbox and type in adjustment clip and it will show up. And when you click this back here, then it will become your favorite and show up down here. You will probably end up using these a lot, so that's why I have them favorited. You drag it into your timeline. I'm going to cut it to the right length. And then we're going to mess around a bit. DaVinci has lots of fun effects that you can just drag and drop into these, like binoculars. I don't know why you would ever use them, but there's also like glitching, which you can animate as well. I can just show you really quick. You can mess around with it. You'll find stuff you can use in the effects folder or in the OpenFX folder. Here you can also find stuff like blurs, which can be really cool because you can animate a blur in the beginning. Let's say you want to have a blur when the clip starts, and then after a couple of frames you want the blur to go away. You can animate it just like that, and now you have a little blur in there. Or say you want to add some glow, you can just drag and drop it in there, click on the glow at the effects tab, and then you can adjust it and make it however strong you wish. Now that looks pretty cool. Keep in mind some of these effects are only in the paid version, but if they are paid, it will show you on screen this little watermark, and then you know, okay, that's not in the free version. There's a ton of stuff here that you can try out. My personal favorite ones are the blur, the glow, and the camera shake, which will just make your video a bit more dynamic. Although it's pretty strong right here, so I'm gonna adjust that. Motion scale a little bit lower, speed scale a little bit lower. And now we have some very, very subtle camera movement in there as well. Another pretty handy tool that I actually didn't know about until recently are timelines. So essentially what timelines are is this thing you see right here, except you can have multiple of them in one project. So if I click up here and I go to another timeline that I set up previously, you see this is different footage than the one we've been working on. In order to make a new timeline, you go up to the File menu and then click on New Timeline, name it whatever you want, make sure these settings right here are what you want them to be, and click Create. And then you have a blank timeline that you can put in whatever you want. And you can also switch back to the previous timelines. Now this animation is already quite okay. If you refine it a little more, you can make it look like this. But this is still pretty annoying to set up, and it's especially frustrating because you have to work with compound clips, and anytime you want to change something that's in the compound clip, you have to redo a bunch of stuff. So how can we avoid this a little bit? Well, for that, my dear friends, we will switch to a timeline I prepared in advance. What we have here essentially is the audio that I want for the clip we're going to animate, and then I dragged in a fusion composition. The way you can find this is you go into the toolbox and you type in Fusion, and then you just drag it into the timeline. It works similarly to an adjustment clip, except that we're going to be animating something within this and not just putting effects on something. So once you drag this in, make sure it has the right amount of time that your animation will need, or in case you're not sure yet, make it a little bit longer so you have some buffer in case you notice that it needs to be a tiny bit longer than what you anticipated. So right now, obviously, there's nothing in here. So how do we put stuff in there? We click on the clip, and then we switch into the Fusion tab. Now, there's some stuff right here that might not be there for you, so I'm going to just put that away. The inspector, we already talked about this, up here. And once you open this, all of this stuff shouldn't be there. You should only have the media out button. Now, what I imported into this are essentially the images we're going to be animating, but I will show you really quick how to get them into here. So you literally just drag and drop your PNGs in here. I'm going to import this one. In order to see what's actually in this file, you have to hit 2 on your keyboard, and then it should bring the image to your screen. It may look like this for you. In case it does and you don't want to have the second screen over here, I don't usually need it, so you just go up here and click this, and then you have one single screen. Now, if you import these, they're all going to have a similar name and you won't really know which is which, so I would recommend right-clicking and renaming them to something that you can find like head. Now I already have this in here, so we're not going to do that, and I'm just going to get rid of that. Essentially, you just drag and drop all of your images that belong to the character in here, and then you can click on them and click 2 to view them. Make sure they all have proper names, or else you're going to get confused. From what I can tell, you can't import several PNGs at once into this, which I wouldn't recommend anyways, because again, you need to be naming all of these individually. How does all of this work? I'm just going to show you step by step how my process works, and then hopefully you can understand a little bit better what all of this is. So first of all, the media out is what we will be seeing in the editing timeline. This is what we will see right here. Right now, obviously, it's black because nothing is attached to it. If I take the head, for example, and attach it, you just click the little rectangle here and drag into the media out, then you can see the head. And now in the edit tab, it will show you the head as well. So what if we take the upper arm, for example, and also drag it in here? Doesn't work. So how do we get all of the parts to work together if we can't put 2 of them into the media out? Well, it's gonna get a little bit more complicated, but don't worry, I promise once you understand this, it won't be hard to do. So in order to put 2 different parts together, you will need a merge node. Each of these little boxes are separate nodes. These are nodes that have a PNG in them. This is the node that shows you the output, and then there's a bunch of different nodes that do different things. Think of them as something like effect layers, I guess. So if we want to combine the head and the body, what we will need to do is we need to decide which of these needs to be on top of which. Now in this case, the head needs to be on top of the body. So what we do is we click on the body, and then we click on this little icon right here, which is a merge node. If you have the body selected, it will attach the merge node to the body. I like to set it up so it's structured kind of like a body would be. So we would have the head on top and the body somewhere lower than the head. And then we can drag the head into the merge. Now if we click on the merge and hit 2, you can see that they are merged together. Now this area is pretty prone to mistakes, because if you do this the wrong way around and you put, for example, the merge onto the head and then drag the body into the merge, what will happen is the body will be on top of the head. You want to have the part that is the lowest go into the merge, and then the other part that is supposed to be on top of it can go into the merge as the second node. So let's fix this up really quick. Body, merge, and then the head can go into the merge. And now it's the right way around. But now we have the issue that we can't really animate this the way it is right now. So what we will need to do is move the head up a little bit, so there's space for another node. Make sure you have the head selected, and then hit this node right here, which adds a transform node. With the transform, you can already see, okay, we have movement options right here, and on screen you will also see this little tool. If you click on this red rectangle, you can essentially move your object over the screen. If you click on the upwards arrow, you can move it up and down, and on the side arrow, you can move it side to side. And then if you click on the green ring thingy, you can also rotate it. Now, this works pretty much the exact same way as the animation in the Edit tab. So first of all, we will need to adjust the anchor point. The anchor point is the little green cross right here. However, you can't really grab it just like this. So what I always do is I go over here to pivot, which is the same as anchor, I guess. You go to pivot and you type in a slightly different number so it moves, and then you see the cross moves over here. And then you can grab the cross and move it to where you think the joint is. And now if we rotate it, it rotates from the right spot. I'm going to really quickly set all of this up the way it's supposed to be, and then we can begin animating. So this merge already has 2 nodes going into it, which means a third node can't really go into this. So we're going to create another merge, and then into that merge we can put the upper arm L, and now if we click on that, it's combined. You have a merge, and then you go into the merge. Yes. Oh, that's the wrong one. Whoops. And then the merge can go in here. Okay, that works. So now say you have an object that moves another object. Like for example, the shoulder of the upper arm right here, if we add a transform. Put the pivot right here. Technically, if we rotate this, the lower arm should be moving as well since it's attached to this arm. But if we do it like this, that won't work. So essentially what you have to do is this transform for the upper arm has to come after the merge that puts together the upper arm and the lower arm. So this transform right here, I'm just going to detach that. This transform right here needs to go in between this merge and this merge. Connect this, make it look a little bit more tidy. And now if we click on this transform and rotate it, it will rotate both of the joints. And then of course the lower arm will need to move as well, so you get a transform. And we move the anchor point. Move the anchor point over here. And now you can rotate the upper arm and the lower arm together. Remember, once you have 2 things attached to a merge, you need to make another merge. Oh, that was the wrong one. We need to make the merge attached to this. And now we can make the other merge go on top. And now it should be right, yes. Fur needs a merge. Other merge goes in here. Perfect. And then we need the cape. Another merge. And that goes in here. And then once you have this set up, you can take your media out and make sure that the last merge goes into here. And then it will look like this. And if we switch into the edit timeline, it will also look like this. If this merge is not connected to the media out, you won't see anything on the media out, and you also won't see anything on the edit tab. So make sure they are connected. So now you know the basics of how to set up the joints, how to make everything merge together, what needs to be on top, and all of that fun stuff. So how do we actually animate this? So right here you have your timeline that you can skip through. Obviously right now nothing is animated, so nothing is moving. You can also hit play and it will loop if you have this enabled. So if we want to animate the rotation of this arm, we will go over here and hit the keyframe next to the angle. We put one for 0, one for 14, and one for 8. Now don't get confused, you don't want to change the pivot because the pivot point is going to change where this arm rotates from. Don't make that mistake, that's not what we want to do. We want to change the rotation angle. So let's go to 0, make the arm rotate, go to 8, make it rotate, and then it should move. Now let's do something similar for the lower arm. For movements like this, where you move an arm, a lower arm, and the hand, for example, I like to postpone the movement a bit for each different part. So for the upper arm, I have a keyframe at 8. I would put that keyframe at 9 for the lower arm, and then at 10 for the hand. We don't have the hand for this though. So we're going to set up an angle for the lower arm here, then at 9, and then again at 14. So we're gonna rotate it. Go here, going to rotate it, maybe like this, and then it looks like this. Now again, this is pretty stiff movement because it automatically makes it move in a linear way, but thankfully, Fusion has a lot more options than the edit timeline when it comes to curves. First of all, there's also a keyframe editor that you can open if you click up here. It will show you your different parts, your different nodes. It's a little bit confusing, but you can figure it out. You can also make it smaller because it's way too big right now. So you have to check the names of the nodes. For example, transform 3 is the movement of our lower arm, and transform 2 is the movement of our upper arm. We can find them over here. And this will essentially show us the keyframes. It's a little bit small, but there's a keyframe right here. Let me open this. There's a keyframe right here, and right here. This is essentially where I would recommend you to go if you just want to move keyframes, copy and paste keyframes, that kind of stuff. I'm gonna close this because for the actual editing of the movement, we want to go into the spline menu. Now, right now we can't see anything there, but you can already see there's 2 things over here. And I'm just going to turn on the transform 3, which is the lower arm movement. It might look really weird, and if that's the case, you can click this icon right here, and it will show you the entire range of the keyframes so that it's not super weird. What I usually do first is I select all of them by clicking and dragging, and then I hit S. Now you can see it makes like a cool curve. I'm going to do the same thing for the other transform. Sometimes you want to turn off the other one because you might select both of them and that's not what you want. So by literally just clicking on these, you can either make them grayed out a little bit so you can't edit them but you can still see them, or you can make them go away completely by clicking twice. Now both of them are way smoother. Let's play this back again. Looks pretty smooth, but we can make this look even better. What I want to do is actually have the movement be very slow at first and then speed up. So how we do this is we can click on our keyframe and then it will show you this little spline thingy right here, which lets you edit the curve. We just drag this out. You can also drag it up or down depending on what movement you want. But in my case, I just want to slow down the movement. So in order to do this, we drag this out, and then you see the curve changes. So what this does is, it shows you, okay, the movement right here, there's not much change. It goes really slow, and then it goes super fast, and then it goes slow back into the last frame. I'm gonna do the same thing for the other transform. And now our movement will look like this. Once you're done with that, you can also close the spline editor again. So that's how you can basically animate anything. There's also different nodes like resize, which you can use if you obviously want to make something smaller or bigger and animate it. but most of the other options aren't that important. Now, one more thing that I often used when I made these was the warp tool. Now, the warp tool you can either use to animate flowy things like a cape or fur, or you can even use it for things that are attached to something that's not supposed to be moving, like the hair on this head, for example. I will show you all of that. Let us start with the cape. We need to right-click on the background somewhere, add tool, go to the very bottom, warp, and then you want to add a grid warp. You're going to drag the cape or whatever you want to animate into the grid warp and then back into the merge. Make sure you're on your media out so you can see what's going on. And now we have this weird little grid over our character. Now you have your weird little round thingy here, and if you click on it, you see you can edit stuff. And you could definitely work with this right now, the way it is. But what I would recommend you to do is first set up the grid in a way that actually fits what you're working with. So what I mean by that is right now, the grid is in general over the whole canvas, which we don't really need. And it makes it pretty inconvenient to work with the cape because right here you can see all of these little edges popping up because the grid is just set up in a way that is not good for the cape. So in order to change this, you need to go over to your inspector, to show, destination, and we want to switch to source. Now if we edit right here, you notice that nothing happens. That's because the source allows you to just edit the grid without affecting the image. Right now we don't really want to see the rest of this character, so we're just going to go onto the grid warp and hit 2, so it's a little bit easier to work with. In order to edit this, first of all we want to change the size. Now roughly this size should be fine. And then we also edit the grid size, which just changes the amount of divisions that's in the grid. Usually I would recommend going for less rather than more because it will make your edits look a bit smoother. So this should be perfectly fine. And then we also want to rotate this. Doesn't need to be perfect yet, don't worry about it. And we need to zoom out, which we can do up here. Let's go to 50%, 25% maybe. Then you select your magnet type. Right now it's this one where you have your like weird brush tool. And you go to select it. This is what I prefer to work with. Having this, you can click and drag, select all of the points, and then click on one of them and just drag it over the general area of where your thing is that you want to animate. Let's go back to fit. And now we will set this up so it matches our cape. I'm literally just going to make sure that the grid is over the edges of the actual artwork. Because if it's not, it will just cut off whatever isn't in the grid. So make sure that everything is in the artwork, even the parts that you potentially don't want to animate. You can just drag around these points, and then there's these little thingies attached that you can use to straighten out the lines that are attached to the points. Usually you don't really need to make these look super perfect, but it will most of the time give you better results. Especially if you want to animate something that's very, very flowy, like this cape, for example. Okay, now up here, I want to make sure I get all of the hair into my grid. Can be a little bit wonky, that's fine. You generally want to make sure that these points aren't too spaced out and somewhat even, but in cases like here where at the end it gets very broad, you obviously want to make sure that you can actually properly animate the area afterwards. And that should be pretty good. So how do we make this move? First of all, again, this is just the source grid, which means whatever you do in here won't affect the actual image. Right now, if we switch to destination, it will merge it weirdly and looks odd, and we don't want that, so we go back to source, copy source to destination, and now we can switch back to destination. It will look exactly the same. And if we click on this, it actually moves. To animate this, again, you need to set up keyframes. The keyframes for this are right here down at the bottom. You don't want to keyframe any of these things. Unless you know what you're doing, then you can obviously do that, but you want to click on the keyframe down here. We're going to set one for 0, for 8, and for 14. For 0, I'm just going to have like an upwards movement. So there, the cape is coming from above and like flowing down. For this, we can switch back to media out to see everything that's going on. And then we're just going to move our little points. This may look very, very wonky, but there's plenty of adjustments you can make. Trust in the process. Just gonna very generally move these. You can also select multiple, obviously, but usually I don't have to do that. Let's make a little gap down here. Also, when you get to the edges, it will essentially start reflecting the image that went to the edge. So if you don't want that, make sure that the edge of your PNG doesn't get stretched too much, because otherwise you will get these weird stretchy marks right there. Okay, and then let's go to the grid warp so we can only see this. Smooth all of this out. Yeah, and that's starting to look a lot more natural. Now, right here we have the problem that we didn't set up the grid very well. You just have to experiment with that a little bit. Eventually you start noticing how to set it up in a way that works efficiently for whatever you're animating. It's a little bit of trial and error and experimentation, but it worked for me, it's gonna work for you. That looks okay. Yeah, sure, let's like this, why not? Okay, let's click to media out and check how it looks. Yeah, that's pretty good. And let's animate. This frame is supposed to go a little bit lower. Move all of these generally down and to the left. Make sure it's all nice and smooth. Yeah, that looks good. And play it. Play it with media out. Yeah, it looks pretty good. So once you have that done, this will still be a linear movement, but luckily you can also change that. You go back into the spline editor, and now you will see a grid warp that has been added. Let me turn off these two and hit this button, and then you can see your keyframes. Now, just as before, we can select these and hit S. So now it should be a pretty smooth movement. I'm seeing right here there's a little bit of a wonky like up and down movement. We're gonna fix that by doing this. And I'm also going to add a little bit of a slow movement at the beginning. Sure this is smooth. And now it looks like this. And that's how to use grid warps to animate something flowy like a cape or hair. But now let's say we have some parts of the body that we want to move that are attached to something that we don't want to move. Like for example, for the head right here, this part of the hair is attached to the rest of the head because it's all drawn in one piece. But if we wanted to move just the hair and not the rest of the head, we could do that with grid warps. Another example would be the booba, because the booba is attached to the rest of the body, but we could make the move using a grid warp, which I will show you now. So to do that, we need to add a grid warp, add tool, warp, grid warp, and then drag the body into this, and then drag it back into the merge. Again, we just set up the warp, so click to source, and then adjust the size. Okay, so for this one, we need to actually think about it a little bit. Essentially what I want is a line of the grid between the booba, one that's going through the middle, and one that's on the edge. And the same goes for this booba, although I think for this booba we only need one that goes out and around. But then the other thing is, in order to make it so that only the booba is moving and none of the rest of the body, we need to make sure that there are some grid lines underneath and above and around the booba to kind of section off the area that we want to move. So for this one, we want 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7. 7 just to be sure. And then X, we don't need as many, because we want one below, one above, and then we need some for the rest of the image. Okay, now we select all of that, drag it roughly over the body, and now we need to adjust it. So we want a line that is responsible for adjusting the outer edge. Oh my god, come on. This is gonna be a little bit more complicated than the other grid warp we did, but essentially just make sure that all of your image is within the grid and that the area that you want to move is separated off by other grid lines from the rest that you don't want to move. And you can essentially leave everything that you don't want to animate pretty messy regarding these points. You just want to make sure that the ones you are animating are set up pretty neat. Okay, and then we put these over here. It's gonna be closer. Okay, then we move all of these upwards. So the ones that I'm moving very close to each other, that's our like cutoff line. This one I might still be moving. So essentially the one below that will be the one that's not going to be moving at all, meaning that anything between these 2 points will still move a little bit, but below that will completely just not move. And the same goes for the sides here. Move that a little bit more inwards. So you see down here there's this really thin line that will be the buffer between moving and non-moving parts. Ideally, we would also want that up here, but right now I ran out of lines, so we will just have to be careful when we animate this. So the buffer down here is essentially there so I can use this point and drag it wherever I want without editing this part over here. So if we did that same thing up here, for example, with no cutoff point, you see it would warp a lot of the rest of the body, which is what we don't want. So in general, make sure to keep this kind of like safety cutoff area if you want to make movements like this. Okay, now that's looking pretty decent. Don't forget to copy source to destination. Go to your destination and then we can animate this. So we're gonna put a keyframe at the beginning, at the middle, and at the end. Make sure when you're animating this that your view is not set to the body, because if you set your view to the body and go over to the grid warp and try to move stuff, you obviously won't see the movement because the body itself isn't moving, the grid warp is moving. So if we hit 2 on the grid warp, you will see that it actually moved. So in the beginning, we want to make the booba come from upwards. Can move this a little bit as well. Okay. It moves down, and we're going to have it go a little bit lower here. Yeah, that works. Okay, and I'm going to really quickly animate it in the spline, grid warp 2. Select these, hit S, Give it a little bit of a slow start. Fix this curve. And now it should look pretty good. Let's go to Media Out. And play it. And that looks pretty cool. So that's how you can use grid warps. They're very, very helpful and a really good tool to use for animatics. In Fusion, with some PCs, you may have issues because Fusion is very resource heavy and it may not work on lower end PCs, which is why I showed you how to animate stuff in the Edit tab. Another thing with Fusion is if we now switch back to the Edit tab, if we want to play this, it might be very laggy. What it does is once you play through this, it will create a cache that will essentially remember what it rendered and then it will render faster. But this also might not work for some PCs, and that's where the render in place that we did earlier comes in pretty handy. With this render cache right here, that's the blue line up here. If that's red, it's not rendered. If it's blue, it's rendered. With the render cache, sometimes you get rendering errors where you will see like a weird glitch on screen or something disappears. If that happens, you can right-click, go to Render Cache Fusion Output, and turn it on or off. And usually, once you do this a couple times or if you restart the program, it will fix the issue. If it doesn't, use Render in Place. That's the best option for that. Usually with this stuff, you're able to fix it in one way or another. It's just a little buggy sometimes. Okay, back to the other clip. So let's say you're done with it, you're happy with it, you've done your first animatic in DaVinci Resolve, and you're happy, and you had some struggles, but you figured it out, and now you're done. How do you get this onto YouTube? Well, you have to render it first, obviously. So we click onto the Deliver tab. Now this Deliver tab looks like so. You can make the timeline a bit bigger if you want to check. If we play, it will just play you your clip. I have the audio disabled right now. If you're happy with that, then you can give it a file name. Let's call this test file character. Choose your location. It will open the browser and then you can pick whatever you want. And then you can choose your video format. This really depends on what you want to do with it. If you need a transparent background, for example, there's tutorials on how to get these in DaVinci Resolve. You can ignore most of this, honestly. The resolution is important, the frame rate is important, which depends on your project, obviously. And then if you put in subtitles, as we did earlier, and you want them to be exported as well, what you can do is go to subtitle settings, export subtitle, and then you can choose what you want them to export as. You can export them as separate files. But if you want to, for example, have the text appear in the video file itself, you can click Burn into Video, and then it will just be part of the video. We don't have subtitles for this, so we will turn this off. Once you have all of this selected, you can go down here, add to render queue, and then render all. It will take a while to render, probably will take a longer time for you if you don't have a great PC or if your video is just straight up longer. But once it's rendered, you can check the location you saved it in. And then you can check it for rendering errors or anything else. Sometimes I don't want to render the entire clip because behind this I will have some other footage that I didn't want to straight up delete. So what you can do is instead of rendering the entire timeline, you can click here and select in and out range, and then you can drag these little handles around at the beginning or at the end. And when you do that, it will only render this section of the clip and not the entire clip. If the result is good, then you're done. You just need to put it up on YouTube. You can also straight up export this to YouTube directly if you go to the YouTube tab and click Upload to YouTube. But personally, I don't really do that. I like to manually check that everything is working before I upload anything. But the option is definitely there. Another note is that there is a free and a paid version of this program, as we already discussed briefly. The free version that you all probably have honestly has everything you need to make animatics, but the paid version comes with a couple of extra things like effects and filters and that kind of stuff. It also reduces the loading time, I think, that the program takes to load up. It enables your PC to use resources a little bit better, and just some advanced stuff like that. You don't need the paid version. Again, you don't need it. I've made animatics with a free version of this program, but I eventually decided to go for the paid version. Now, the paid version, luckily, is a one-time payment. I think it's like 200 something euros that you have to pay. But it's a one-time payment, and then you own the program, and you own all future updates of the program, which is great. I really appreciate that. But again, you don't need the paid version if you don't want it. And that's everything. This is how you can make animation memes in DaVinci Resolve practically for free. Now, I'm sure there's some of you guys who have some extra tips that you found out along the way or that you already knew before going into this. And you're free to leave those in the comments. I will try to collect them and write them into the pinned comment or the description of the video. So definitely check those out. If you thought the tutorial was helpful, or you liked the animatic footage that we used, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. I will continue posting animatics as often as I can, and your support is really appreciated. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter as well, where I upload new artworks pretty frequently. If you have any questions or concerns, leave a comment, or if it's something that you need help with, you can also join our Discord, where there's many lovely people who I'm sure will lend you a hand. Thank you so much for watching. Will out. And switch back to... Oh my god, shut the fuck up, Java.